Welcome, everybody, to the Town of Los Gatos Council meeting of October 2nd. Could I have a roll call, please?
Thank you and good evening. Councilmember Spector.
Here.
Councilmember Sayak.
Here.
Councilmember Jensen.
Here.
Vice Mayor Leonardis.
Here.
Mayor and Chair Rennie.
Here. All right, so if this time, if I could ask Franklin Zhao to come up and join me. Welcome, Franklin. So first of all, we're going to tell everybody about you. So did I say your last name right? Zhao, is that right?
It's so.
So? Okay. I don't know if I'll quite get it right. Anyway, so they got it, I think. And you go to Dave's Avenue, and you're in the second grade, and third?
Yeah, I'm in third grade.
Third grade now. Okay, good. And you like to play basketball and swim, and you love to play with Rubik cubes and can solve 2x2s, 3x3s, and 4x4 cubes. And you claim yourself as a cuber.
Yes.
Back in my day, being square wasn't good, but okay. One of his dreams is to be a popular YouTuber who teaches others how to solve Rubik's Cube on YouTube. So if I wanted to solve a Rubik's Cube, what would I do first?
You need to first inspect the cube.
Okay, that's good. I like that idea. All right, so let's ask everybody to stand and join us in the pledge. So the flag's here. I'm going to give you the mic and ask everybody to join and go ahead and start.
Please join me in the pledge. Ready? Salute. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, excellent. So if you could shake Marcia and Steve's hand.
Thank you very much, sir. Excellent job.
And we have a little gift for you. Thank you. Yeah, it's not a Rubik's Cube, but you can. One more round of applause for Franklin. All right, that was fun. Next up, let's check our agenda here. We have closed session report.
I don't believe we have any. It was after. Okay, on September 19th, council met in closed session to discuss labor negotiations. No action was taken that requires reporting under the Brown Act.
All right, thank you. Next up is council and manager matters. Let's start with council member Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yesterday, the council and the planning commission met for its initial meeting on the general plan. And also yesterday, the finance committee met discussing generally unfunded liabilities.
Councilmember Sack.
Okay. Three things occurred since our last public meeting. The first is we had a State of the Assembly district event, and one of our own Los Gatos recipients received an award. He is the CEO of the Boys and Girls Club. So we presented that. Youth Park Day was on Saturday. I was there with the mayor, and we selected and awarded our youth finalists. That will be, I guess they're Youth Citizens of the Year, and they'll be kicking off our holiday parade for us. And last night there was a joint study session that all council members were at, in addition to our planning commission.
Thank you. In addition to what Councilmember Sayak mentioned, I attended the policy committee on September 20th. I also did a welcome in the chambers for the art that you see around here. This art was done by people that were in the hospital healing from serious illnesses, and this was a therapy to help people heal, so you can enjoy it during the council meeting here. I also attended two of the Cities Association subcommittee. We had calls. One was the Transportation Subcommittee and one for a Sustainable Committee talking about EV infrastructure. And the point of those subcommittees are to help work up recommendations the cities association can give to all the cities on those particular subjects, on things that they may want to take up for ordinances or others. I also attended the welcome for the new high school superintendent on 9/24. That was at Saratoga High. And then I met with him and the town manager yesterday, and we had a good conversation and pledged to work closely together between the town and the Los Gatos Saratoga Unified School District. Also, the West Valley mayors and managers met on 9/26, and I was also the youth park, as mentioned. And then on 9/28, I got to spend the day playing Legos. And actually, up on the screen here, you can see our creation. It was educational but fun at the same time. This was put on by something called ULI SVEDA. It's an urban plan class for public officials. And what they did is they formed teams of 5 people made of planning commissioners and council members. My team was made up of a planning commissioner from Sunnyvale and a planning commissioner from Morgan Hill, and I believe it was the mayor from Union City and another council member from Fremont. I might have those cities mixed up a little bit. Anyway, so basically what they did is they facilitated us through redeveloping a blighted area of a fictitious neighborhood in a larger city. And the place where you see the Legos placed is the buildings that we had to tear down or renovate, basically. And we were acting as a company responding to an RFP by a council. So this is kind of like, instead of being on the council side, we got to be on the other side and respond to an RFP. And the city had desired outcomes and directions, which included a financial return for the company itself. They wanted to make sure that it was going to be viable and they'd be able to get capital. And the town had to, or the city had to make $1.5 million in tax revenue over 10 years. So these were our financial goals. And then from that, we had letters from different neighborhood groups that told us which things to save or which things to change. And so basically we had to take all of these different inputs and come up with a design. And you can see up there the brown buildings were historic buildings that we decided to keep. The red is retail, and the shorter yellow were townhouses, and the taller ones are podium-style apartments, and the blue were offices. So that was our final design after most of the day working on this. And one of the interesting learnings I had was we started off trying to in the brown buildings you could program office or services, library. I think we ended up with a branch library, things like that in there. We had lots of services. And the green is open space. We had lots of open space, and we were aggressive on our affordable housing. I think we were trying to do 10 to 15% affordable housing, which doesn't sound like a lot, does it? There was no way we could get this to pencil out. We ended up having to chop back open space. We had to chop back our affordable housing. We had to cut some of the services we wanted to have in the brown building. So it was really interesting. And then at the end, we had to present to 3 council members, basically, who then grilled us like council members do. So actually, Liz Niths, the mayor from Palo Alto, made the comment. She says, this is really different being on the other side of this, because she was on not my team, but a different team. And interestingly, my team actually won, and my role was the site planner. Each of us on the team had different roles. We had neighborhood liaison, city liaison, so forth. I was the site planner, and we won, they said, based on 2 things. Our whole team understood our vision and all explained it, but also because of our site plan and the design we did. So anyway, I'm belaboring this one, but I'm just sharing with you a little bit of fun we have. So with that, I'll pass off to Vice Mayor Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. I wish the North 40 was that easy. I have nothing to report this time.
I attended the policy committee meeting along with the mayor.
Okay, thank you. Town manager matters?
Yes. First of all, our library is closed on Monday for maintenance. That is a holiday for the schools, so hopefully our residents will not be inconvenienced. We have also issued a request for artwork for a gateway design through our Arts and Culture Commission. That RFP is now available on the town's website. And lastly, we are continuing our recruitment for our boards and commissions. Applications are due on the 26th of October, and interviews will be on November 6th. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is our consent calendar. Would any member of council wish to pull an item from consent? Seeing none, would any member of the public wish to pull an item from consent? Seeing no one rushing forward, clerk has no cards, I assume. I'll call on Councilmember Jensen.
I move approval of the consent calendar consisting of items 1 through 6 with special note for those who might be interested in watching that it includes the fence ordinance discussion being continued to October 16th.
Second.
Okay, I have a motion, a second. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Anybody opposed? Passes unanimously. Thank you. Next, we are on to item number 7, which is energy efficiency upgrades townwide. Oh, you're right. I forgot verbal communications. Thank you. Would any member of the public wish to address us for 3 minutes on an item that is not on tonight's agenda? Do we have any cards for verbal communication? See, I could read their minds. All right, so I'll close verbal communication, and then we'll go on to item number 7.
Good evening, Matt Morley, Director of Parks and Public Works, here to present an item on energy efficiency upgrades that we've been working on to bring to you with a lot of good work from our team in Parks and Public Works, including Jim Harbin, our Facilities Environment Manager, and a consultant team led by Sizer Co. And they're all here to answer questions along the way, should we have them. This is a public hearing with a multi-part recommendation. It includes a series of facilities-related projects that create energy savings and a funding plan that taps those savings to minimize our general fund commitments. I want to start with talking a little bit about the projects. So in June, we brought the first step to council, which authorized an analysis of our building needs in terms of energy conservation and equipment replacement. This came at a cost of $34,000 that the council approved back in June. That amount is deferred if we move forward with the project and rolled into the cost of the project, so we have made no expenditures to date on that. Through this analysis, we identified a wide breadth of projects that focus on maximizing energy savings, meeting the town infrastructure replacement needs, and improving operational efficiencies in our buildings. So all positive things for the town. And after vetting through staff and working with the consultant, we've brought forward a project, about a dozen separate projects that total $1.6 million in construction costs. Through California Government Code Section 4217, we're able to deliver these projects in a unique way. And this Government Code section was set up to allow for the delivery of energy conservation projects that require a lot of advanced legwork from a consultant. So there's a lot of time invested up front to make them happen. So it allows for a methodology of using an RFP to select that vendor, which we did. Our vendor is Sizer Co. As I mentioned, they're here with us tonight. And then through that, we go through a fairly strict analysis on what these projects look like, and then roll them together into something that we can bring forward for council consideration. All of this comes with competitive bidding along the way. So all of these the projects that we're presenting have had competitive costs gathered for them, so that we can ensure that we're paying attention to what the market is providing. Some of the projects that you might be interested in include mechanical HVAC, heating, ventilation, and air conditioning upgrades. So replacement of equipment that is failed or failing, upgrades of our controls so that we're able to better control the temperature in our facilities. One of the examples is the council chambers. Another one near to us is the police building. So we have the dispatch in the lower level of the police building. and they're controlled with the entire building. So they go 24/7. So the that entire portion of the building gets conditioned 24/7. After this project, we'll be able to break them out and condition them in the middle of the night, and not condition the rest of the police department, and so reap some savings from that perspective. The projects target a 10-year payback, so there's quite a bit of work that goes in to make sure that the energy savings actually pay for the cost of the projects over the average of all of the 12 projects that we're bringing forward. So once we identify the projects, we took an in-depth look at the potential for energy savings and how this all works out. This is done through an industry standard audit called an investment grade audit. An investment grade audit is done to stringent guidelines that makes it worthwhile for an investor to feel confident that the energy savings that are calculated through this process will actually come to fruition. So it's by having a standard, an accepted international standard, you remove the risk of sort of overestimating those energy savings and getting caught later on in the program. This is already the second review, so we've gone through some staff iteration and identifying projects and what's worthwhile for us, and come into the second review of the cost savings and sort of that second check into the project. Through the audit, we identified $1.4 million in potential savings. So if you remember, I said $1.6 million in construction costs. For those construction costs, we have identified $1.4 million in savings over 10 years. So that we're really looking at a 10-year payback, and I'll talk about why a 10-year payback in a minute. The reason that there's a delta there is because we did include some projects that have a lesser payback but are already in our CIP. So for instance, at the yard, we have some heaters that are completely failed and we need to replace them. We also have some air conditioning units that serve our chiller rooms that are near failure. They'll fail in the next year or two that need to be replaced. And as you may know, with a server room, they need to be replaced or the servers overheat and it causes a whole lot more damage. So we need to be proactive on those. So adding those things in there adds a little bit more money to the project, but it was worthwhile from staff's perspective to bundle the project into one big one to get that economy of scale while we had all of the contractors in here looking at the work. So with that, we're also including a proposal to bring the capital dollars that we had already allocated through the capital program into this project, and that's why there's that roughly $200,000 delta. So we have this audit that tells us we have savings, and we have this big chunk of dollars that we need to fund. So how do we get there? And that's the sort of the next item in the memo, and this is a program called PG&E on-bill financing. PG&E has this program where they do their own separate independent review of our audit, so they triple check us in our calculations already. And if they're comfortable with it, they allow us to do on-bill financing. On-bill financing is recognizing that we'll have those energy savings over the next 10 years and programming those savings to pay back what is essentially a zero-interest loan. So if we had $1,000 in energy savings in a year, that would break up across our 12 bills for that year, and we would roll the dollars for the cost of that $1,000 worth of construction into those bills. So over the course of 10 years, that's that $1.4 million of energy savings that we've identified that is available for PG&E on-bill financing. It's a very unique program. A number of cities are using it and quite successfully in front-loading their projects. So it allows us an opportunity to really knock out a lot of our deferred maintenance, our capital infrastructure needs, and not have a long-term cost to the town. If we were to take another option and, for example, try to advance these projects ourselves, we would space them out over time to allow staff to be able to move them forward, and it would take us a good portion of that 10 years just to deliver the projects. In this way, we front-load the delivery with a project schedule looking to have the projects completed in the April timeframe, so a very fast timeline. Again, the investment grade audit really goes into ensuring that the calculations for the energy savings are accurate. And of course, this is the big risk with the project. So what happens if our energy savings don't materialize? So acknowledging that there's that extra risk in there, there's a couple things that a couple steps that we've taken to minimize that. One is we're looking at this short 10-year life cycle payback. So a good amount of the equipment has a 15-year life cycle. And by shortening the payback calculation to 10, we actually reap the benefit of initial 5 years of savings after that PG&E on-bill financing is complete in year 10. There's also another check, and this is a measurement and verification check. So after the projects come online, so if we replace an air conditioning unit and we've calculated up front that we're going to have savings from that replacement, the consultant actually comes in and measures to ensure that those savings are happening, and they do that right after the air conditioning unit comes online, and they ensure that the calculations are true. And then they do that again a year later to make sure that it's sustainable, so that we have 2 more checks along the way on ensuring that the risk is minimized. And of course, I did mention that PG&E has their third-party review in the mix as well. In spite of all these safeguards, obviously I'm highlighting it, there is a slight risk that some savings will not materialize. This is essentially a loan, so we are on the hook for paying it back. So if our savings don't materialize, our PG&E bill will be a little bit higher than what we'd expect on a monthly basis, and that would roll into the cost of the bill. It's not something where if the savings don't materialize that we're off the hook on it. So that is, in short, a summary of the program. With the approval of the staff recommendation, we would begin work right away for that completion target in April. PG&E funding is reimbursement, so the town would float the dollars for the project cost up front. The payback is a couple of months, so by sort of the June timeframe, we would expect to be receiving the last of the PG&E payments. Of course, that's a PG&E timeline, so we're at their disposal on that one, but that's what we would anticipate. And we do have sufficient funds in the capital program to be able to carry that cash flow for that period of time. So that completes my report, and of course, as always, we're here to support the discussion.
Questions from council? Looks like nothing. I'm going to ask one that maybe is not relevant to the decision, but I have to ask it anyway. On page 3 of 5, it says that we're going to save an annual reduction of 41 metric tons of greenhouse gases. I'm wondering if that is calculated just on the natural gas therms, since the electrical consumption is already 100% carbon free.
Good question.
In other words, did they use the PG&E profile for calculating the kilowatt hours, or did they use the Silicon Valley Clean Energy Authority?
So I'll give a second for the mic to get to Gabe Johnson with Sizerco, and he's our account executive, and he'll be able to help us with that question.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
The answer is yes, it was natural gas only.
So it's 41 metric tons just from the 7,000 some hundred some therms of natural gas a year. Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Other questions from council? Seeing none, I'll open up the public testimony. Would any member of the public wish to speak to us on this item? No cards with the clerk. I'll close public testimony, come back up to council for questions, discussion, motion. Councilmember Jensen?
I'll make a motion that we approve the resolution of the Town Council of Los Gatos, which is attachment 1. Authorize the town manager to negotiate and execute necessary agreements to participate in PG&E on-bill financing in the amount of $1,439,995. Authorize a budget adjustment recognizing revenue from PG&E on-bill financing in the amount of the same amount, and that we authorize the reallocation of funds from different energy-efficient projects to PPW job number 821-2008 in the amount of $258,354.
Would anybody like to second? Okay, seconded by Councilmember Sack. Any further discussion? Seeing none, all in favor? Aye. Anybody opposed? Looks like it passes unanimously. Thank you. And we're on to other business item number 8, which is to provide direction regarding potential regulations for short-term rentals.
Good evening, Mayor and council members. I'm Holly Zapala, Management Analyst, and the item before you is a discussion regarding short-term rentals in Los Gatos. Staff is looking for guidance from council tonight on whether to maintain the town's status quo approach to prohibiting short-term rentals or to see if there is interest in allowing and regulating them. So I will start with a little background information. Short-term rental, or STR, is the practice of renting a portion of or an entire home to a person or group for less than 30 days. STRs have seen rapid growth in recent years due to the emergence of sharing economy websites. Airbnb is the most popular, but there are a variety of others, including VRBO, Flipkey, and HomeAway. Municipalities locally and around the world have been developing strategies in response to the growing popularity of this occurrence. The town's current zoning ordinance is silent on short-term rental as a permitted use in any of the town zones, which by default prohibits them from occurring in town. STRs would fall under the definition of hotel, and hotels are not permitted in residential zones. Therefore, homeowners are not allowed to rent out their properties for less than 30 days. The town currently enforces this prohibition on a complaint-driven basis. Since 2015, the town has received between 1 and 3 STR-related complaints per year. However, a review of Airbnb's website shows there are currently between 50 and 100 properties listed in Los Gatos. The rental listings do not include addresses, which makes them difficult to locate without booking the rental first. If the town chooses to remain with the status quo for STRs, staff could create enforcement tools to encourage compliance and could amend the ordinance to include a compliance initiative or fine. If the council is interested in allowing and regulating STRs, there are a number of policy considerations to take into account. I'll give a brief overview of some of the regulations other municipalities are using. The first consideration is hosted versus unhosted rentals. Hosted rentals require the permanent resident to live and be present at the home while it is being rented. Unhosted rentals allow an entire property to be rented without the host present. Unhosted rentals may have more neighborhood compatibility issues like noise complaints and could potentially have a greater impact on the affordability of the rental housing market, as owners may seek to rent multiple properties concurrently. Another possible regulatory measure is geographic zones. STRs could be limited to certain zones within the town, or the number of STRs within a certain zone could be limited. Another possibility would be to require a minimum distance between STR properties. A third consideration would be to limit the number of rental days allowed per year. That number could be different for hosted and unhosted rentals, should both types be allowed. It's worth noting that this has been difficult for jurisdictions to enforce. Another regulation could be allowing maximum number of guests at one time. This is also difficult to enforce, but is a tactic for controlling parking and noise. The number could be different, again, for hosted versus unhosted rentals. And then an additional consideration is parking. Vehicle parking could be required to remain on site, or the number of renter vehicles could be limited. Another regulatory measure could be to prohibit assembly or commercial uses such as weddings or special events as a way to reduce neighborhood impact. Additional general STR considerations include impact on both housing availability and neighborhood character. Given the relatively low number of STRs in Los Gatos, they likely have a minimal impact on current housing availability. However, if more homeowners begin renting their properties, this could become a more prominent issue. Additional STR renters may also impact noise, parking, and neighborhood character. Many of the regulatory considerations I outlined previously can be used to address these concerns, including requiring the STR to be hosted, requiring parking to be on site, prohibiting commercial uses, or requiring hosts to provide guests with local rules regarding noise, etc. Enforcement must also be considered. For either a continued ban on STRs or some form of a regulated model. Violation penalties should be clear and encourage compliance. Some municipalities have high penalties for failing to register an STR within a defined period of time, and also have the ability to revoke an STR operator's license after a number of violations. The final consideration I will discuss tonight is revenue collection. If the town were to move forward with a regulatory program for STRs, a process for transient occupancy tax, or TOT, would need to be established. Airbnb has begun entering into agreements with municipalities to collect and remit TOT on behalf of its hosts. And this allows municipalities to interact with one organization rather than collecting funds from hundreds of individual property owners. Hosts using platforms other than Airbnb would self-report and remit TOT to the town. The other option there would be to refrain from contracting with Airbnb and use the honor system, where owners remit taxes directly to the town for all platforms. This approach has shown to be much less effective in other municipalities. So staff looks forward to the direction of the council to determine if the status quo approach to short-term rentals in Los Gatos should be maintained, or if regulations should be drafted to allow STRs. Among the options for consideration are make no changes and create enforcement tools to encourage compliance, create an ordinance regulating STRs and rely on hosts to self-report and remit TOT to the town, create an ordinance regulating STRs and enter into an agreement with Airbnb, wherein Airbnb collects TOT and remits to the town for its hosts, or enter into an agreement with Airbnb, wherein Airbnb collects and remits TOT to the town while not changing the current ordinance. That concludes the report, and staff is available for questions.
Vice Mayor Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. How come the other entities, VRBO, Flipkey, and HomeAway, don't have the agreements to help collect the taxes?
That could be a possibility in the future. Right now, Airbnb is the big one. So if that was something that the town was interested in doing, we would start with Airbnb. I think they currently have agreements with over 50 municipalities in California. And I think they're kind of the leader, and the others may follow suit.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jensen.
This is probably for Mr. Schultz. I was under the impression that the town had an ordinance that regulated bed and breakfasts. That could be that bed and breakfasts were popular at some point and we just regulated them as a hotel because there was a controversy for a property in the Almond Grove that was being used as a bed and breakfast. So can you help me out?
Probably turn towards Joel, but the bed and breakfast in the hotel, there are certain districts where that's allowed. Where we're seeing these short-term rentals are in the residential districts. So your bed and breakfast or your hotel still needs to be in the right zoning area as opposed to where you saw the map. Those are all located in the residential areas where a bed and breakfast or a hotel are not allowed.
That I understand, and Joel, wherever he is, may know. The controversy over the house in the residential area that people alleged was being used as a motel.
So the town currently does not allow bed and breakfast. We treat them as a hotel, as Mr. Schultz mentioned. Since at least 2000, they have not been permitted. I know over that time there have been discussions on whether or not to create regulations and to allow potentially bed and breakfasts. But now the short-term rental really has kind of taken that niche, and that's the big question before you this evening.
Okay, we'll go with Councilmember Sack.
So you mentioned that the town has received a few complaints. So could you go into the details of those? Was it related to noise, to parking, or was it simply because someone was doing this practice?
I'm not sure. That was just the information that I received from our code compliance officer, but I don't have details on the complaint.
It was both. We've had them for both noise and parking, but I would say parking's the primary that we hear first. Is there seems to be a lot of cars or a lot of people coming and going. How is this allowed? And they see the constant turnover of different people, and then the next one is noise. I would add, even though we are complaint driven, we do go online about every 4 to 6 months and try. You don't have addresses as was stated, but we do try to send out, they've got a little response box, and we try to tell people that as it currently states, they're not allowed.
Go ahead.
Can you give me a sense of how many complaints?
I think, as Holly mentioned, it's between 3 and 5 a year. I think since I've been here, it's not a substantial amount like leaf blowers or other noise even that we get, but there are some, and it's not so much. I don't think this report's coming from you from code compliance driven. It's whether how should we handle this, because certainly there are quite a few, and in my mind at least, either we should permit it and regulate it so that you can collect the revenues, or do more if in fact we are going to prohibit it, to actually put it in our code that it's specifically prohibited. Because many times when we tell people it's prohibited, they want us to point to the exact code section that says it's not, and we have to explain to them it's not a permitted use in the residential district area, therefore it's not allowed.
Councilmember Spector?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question of staff. In your staff report, you have a chart that identifies jurisdictions that allow, don't allow, haven't considered. In the don't allow, you list 4 cities, and I just wanted to get some idea. I'll take a couple of them, close ones. Campbell and Saratoga. Do you know why Campbell and Saratoga disallow the STRs?
I don't know why. A lot of municipalities have reacted in a variety of different ways. And so I just kind of collected the information, but I'm not sure the reasoning behind that decision.
Thank you.
Okay, no more questions. I'll open the public testimony. I have one card from Michael Silva.
My name is Michael Silva. I think I wrote the wrong reason for me being here on that. It's not number 8.
So you want to be on number 9 then for?
It's more like something other business, right?
In other words, it should have been verbal communication?
Yes.
Okay, well, go ahead and give us your verbal communication now.
All right, well, excuse me. What I'm here for, my name is Michael Silva. I live here in town, have for a long time, and I am currently on the executive board for the American Legion Post 99. We've lost our facility, and I heard that there was possibly space here in town, maybe the Tate Museum or Forbes Mill or something like that, where we may be able to get into an agreement with the town to rent that for some length of time to continue our day-to-day business, as well as organize some of the events for things that we do for veterans. We go to Menlo Park. We support those people up there that are going through program changes and troubles and things like that. We support their families. We find and have liaison that goes out to get the different benefits that they have coming to them that they don't have those needs to do or that ability to do. And also do small events so we can raise more money to do those kind of things. And since we've had to leave the post there, we're kind of at a stop place, and we'd like to find a home to do that. It seems like this is a possibility, and I'd like you to consider that, and not to necessarily make a decision this evening, although we are trying to find a home rather quickly. But to at least consider it and give us some feedback as to what you think, what you would need from us, or if those facilities are even possible.
Okay.
That's what I'm here for.
I would ask Mr. Arn Andrews to pass you his card. He's the one that is organizing what's going to happen with our surplus properties. And it looks like we have a question for Mr. Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. And I just wanted to ask Mr. Silva if he was aware of agenda item number 9, where we will be discussing a future use of the venue property. That could be something you want to speak on as well.
Oh, that would be nice. I'm familiar with that property. I was I was on the board there with the Place for Teens and all that at a time.
That'll be the next agenda item.
Okay. All right.
All right, thank you.
Thank you.
So I assume Maria Resta would like to speak on this one?
Hi, Maria Risto, 85 Broadway. I'm really glad to see this item come up because it's something that I've thought about and talked to other people about for a couple of years. And I'm sure for any of you, if you've traveled to other cities, when I travel with my family or I travel with friends, I actually prefer to stay in an Airbnb over a hotel because you can share a space, you can cook your meals, you can be part of a neighborhood. And I've stayed a lot of places internationally and in the U.S. where the TOT is collected. So I typically do pay that whenever I stay someplace. Oftentimes there's information telling me what it pays for. So when we were in Florida this summer on Amelia Island, there was specific information about how it's being used to keep the beaches clean and to work on turtle preservation. So I think, if we could do some messaging for revitalization of downtown or parks or something. But I think this is a revenue source. It's also an activity that's already occurring, and we have a desirable town. People do want to stay. Some people want the hotel with the amenities and, the restaurant built in. Other people want to be part of our neighborhoods. When there's a discussion about parking, I don't want to minimize that, but we have gone to a point where we're allowing ADUs, and we are not allowed to decide if parking is an issue with that or not. Routinely, people have big parties, other things. I think the parking will sort itself out. Maybe you need to make considerations around that, but I would say prohibiting Airbnbs because of parking seems like a losing argument because it already is going on. So I think it's more important that we look at the fact that Los Gatos is a desirable place for short-term rentals, that we have it going on, that the complaints are minimal, and that we have an opportunity to make this part of another dimension of why our town is desirable and, an opportunity for people to stay here.
Okay, questions for Ms. Risto? Seeing none, thank you very much. I have no more cards on this item. Would anybody else wish to speak to us on this item? Seeing nobody coming forward, I will close the public testimony, come back to council for more questions, motions. Councilmember Jensen.
I'm going to put this in the form of a motion to begin discussion or else maybe get the motion passed. It strikes me that this is ideal for a discussion at the policy committee level because we are not going to make the regulations here tonight on this item. We're going to have to go back to the staff for more work on it. I think there's more information that we would like to get. Why did Campbell and Saratoga choose to not allow it? Why did Palo Alto not allow it and yet reach an agreement to collect taxes? Interesting strategy, which I would not advocate. But yes, it's happening. That doesn't mean that it's not subject to any kind of regulation. And whether we want to try to use our limited resources to enforce against our prohibition or use limited resources in a way to regulate it, it strikes me that there are a lot of issues here. There are a lot of things that need preliminary discussion and staff work. So my motion is actually to send this matter to the policy committee with input and suggestions from members of the council, if this were to get a second, as to what particularly should be discussed and what information should be brought back so that we can have a more full discussion of it at the appropriate time.
Okay, I have a motion. Would anybody like to second this motion? Councilmember Sack.
I'll second that if I could add some more information. The analysis that Councilmember Jensen had requested is definitely information I'd like to also have, whether it's a staff report to policy committee or not. This is one of those ordinances where I think a lot of people would want to weigh in if they were actually paying attention. And so I'd like staff to give some thought of how else we can get this besides our routine advertisement. Normally, when there are things of this nature, we work with our chamber. I see our chamber director here. But this is something where if we had several HOAs, it would be an ideal way to to share this information. So I just ask our staff to think about how else to reach into neighborhood associations to share this information, because I do think this is something that that a lot of people would have an opinion on, and frankly, I could go either way, but I'd like to hear more voices rather than the one we heard today.
And so if I could just be clear, that's a seconding of the motion without any changes to it. The motion included people giving their input, so that was just your input and a clear second on the motion.
Correct, with the request of staff.
Okay, so I have a second and a motion. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Question of staff and then some input. The question of staff is, if we went forward one way or the other, yes, we're going to do it, no, we're not going to do it, would that be an ordinance or what level of regulation?
Yes, it would be an ordinance.
All right. So then it would go from the policy committee to however we do our ordinance.
Yes, and it would probably, depending on what you do, it would probably even have to go to the planning commission. If it's in your zoning code, then it's in your, then it has to go to planning commission. It could possibly be not have to do that, but in all likelihood, it would also have to go to planning commission for hearings.
Okay. So with that in mind, the input is my husband and I, first there's the personal and then there's the council person. From a personal level, my husband and I have used VRBOs or Airbnbs probably as early as maybe when they first started. Even though we are the ones using them, issues have come up. In one instance, the site we didn't cause this to happen, but the site could no longer be used the following year because the neighbors complained about noise. In another instance, the city required the owner of the property to be on site, which is one of the things that staff mentioned. So those were a couple of issues that came up in my experience. The other thing is, and maybe this is what Ms. Jensen remembers, I don't know, but several in the 80s, what do you call it? The rental of homes in a neighborhood for people as guests, that got a lot of opposition, and maybe that is what Ms. Sayoc is talking about, because people really came forward to the Planning Commission and to the council, and the concern at that time was the commercialization of neighborhoods, noise in the neighborhoods, people that you don't know, the parking. So those issues all came up. With regard to the fact that there may not already be any complaints or any problems, that might be because right now in Los Gatos, it's not a formalized use. Now that's all the personal stuff. With the eyes of right now as a person who's making decisions on housing, it seems to me that one area where people might do a secondary unit would be ADUs, and those are something that are really good for housing. Another would be that people would rent out their homes on a short term, but maybe those would be homes that would be really good for housing. And in both instances, with the housing or home or with the ADUs, those are issues right now that we need to use those units for housing. So the maker of the motion suggested that we feed into the policy committee, and again, from someone who's used the Airbnbs and someone who has looked at this from a planning perspective, that's the input I would forward on to you.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Question for the town attorney. Page 6 of 7 on the staff report, the last bullet, it says, enter into an agreement with Airbnb wherein we can collect the TOT on behalf of those who are participating in the sharing economy. And what would be required for us to enter into an agreement with Airbnb at this point in time? Because I heard discussed by other council members and a motion was made, a process that could possibly take a very long time. And in the interim, I think it would be great to participate in collecting some revenue.
So I certainly would like to look at the Palo Alto model, but in my mind, if in fact it's not allowed, we should not be collecting any taxes on it, and that's what we've been telling the finance department is no, we shouldn't be. So what you're asking to do is enter into an agreement that's contrary to what our law is, and our ordinance says it's not allowed. So if you're looking in the interim for us to enter into an agreement for something that's not currently allowed, I'd have to look at that Palo Alto model very closely before I just allow that to start to occur.
And I would just add, from a staff perspective, it wasn't necessarily a recommendation. It was just showing that that is a model that's out there in existence now and just reflecting the different types of business models that are out there.
Now, what I will tell you is the agreements are going to go away. There's legislation going on right now that these home sharing, all of them, have to collect. So it is possible within the next year or two, we will be getting checks from, in fact, I think we currently do get a certain checks maybe for VRBR or for some of these companies right now, and I think Mr. Conway can confirm this, but it's only coming from the hotels. So actually, if you look on VRBO, those sites, the hotels are actually advertising on those sites also, either Airbnb or VRBO. They're actually putting the hotels. So we are already getting a certain extent. So I believe in a year or two, we would probably be getting checks without an agreement from these companies because they will all have to be required to obtain the TOT. So it's still going to be an enforcement mechanism even if we don't allow it, but we'd be receiving it. But I do have the issue with entering into an agreement when you've already trying to prohibit something. It'd be the same as for cannabis. We prohibit dispensaries in town, and if one opened up and we said, okay, since you're open, we want to collect your taxes on your dispensary even though it's not allowed.
Follow up?
Yes, thank you. So essentially when we read in the staff report that San Jose and some other entities are collecting from Airbnb, they have ordinances that don't prohibit it. Is that correct?
Exactly. They've regulated it through all those things that I think are a good idea to send a policy committee to look at what the secondary effects are, to try to do more outreach, to see maybe we should allow it in certain areas that aren't as dense as other areas. This is a subject that I've dealt with for at least 20 years. It's a very hot topic for cities. Malibu was about ready to ban it, and now they're looking at allowing it in some areas and not. Los Altos just banned it. And so even when they do allow it, Morro Bay allowed it. I wrote that ordinance 12 years ago, and now they're having issues and want to ban it. So it's a very hot topic issue as far as neighborhood compatibility that needs quite a bit of discussion before you make a decision. But it can generate a lot of revenue also. So there's some weighing that council needs to do to finally get to that decision. But I think there needs to be a lot more outreach, because if it just passes and it starts to occur, then you're dealing with the repercussions of it.
Thank you.
Councilmember Jensen.
As the maker of the motion, I just wanted to incorporate the input that we've had from the three council members now, and emphasize that financing both revenue and as it affects housing prices, because there's an article, I think it was in New York Times this past week, about Airbnb and rentals in Paris and Barcelona, and they're so popular, obviously, that people are actually buying up apartments and condos and just turning them around as investment properties. And so those who have lived in those neighborhoods for a long time are essentially being booted out for the price that you can get on the Airbnb. We obviously don't want that to happen, so any kind of regulation that we're going to do is going to have to take that housing price effect into consideration. Obviously, we can't stop people from buying and selling houses, but we can certainly do something vis-a-vis either whether we decide to just keep the status quo or do some regulation. That's something that we need to know about. We need to know about the models of the other cities in our area, why they chose to go that way, what their ordinances look like. So, and I'd also, of course, like to have a short turnaround because I think it is a topic that we're going to have to address sooner rather than later because I think probably all of us have used an Airbnb or a VRBO, and they're great when you're traveling, but not so great if you live there. So I look forward to the discussion and appreciate the input from council, so that's my motion.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. A couple of things. The town attorney and the maker of the motion both referenced the revenue, and if that is going to be an issue that we'll consider in whether it's a go or no go, it would be significant to me to establish parameters or givens and say within those parameters you can anticipate revenue of X. And for example, if you were going to tell me you can anticipate revenue of $1,000 a year, I might have a different idea than if you told me it was going to be $750,000 a year. So not just it's going to generate revenue, but establish parameters and then what would it be. The other one is, and the town manager referenced this, the word I was trying to think about was bed and breakfast, and that's the issue that we had in the Almond Grove. This issue is before us this evening, but I know this chamber is not filled with people from Almond Grove, and it gets back to the maker of the motion and the staff saying we need to get the word out when this is considered at whatever level to those individuals and homes and renters who have experienced the issue.
Okay, I'll make just a couple comments. Hopefully we'll get this back to policy committee while I'm still on it next year. I don't know if I'll still be on it. That'll be up to the next mayor. But this is a topic I'm interested in, and I do agree with Councilmember Spector about the commercialization, but I think there's a lot of opportunities for safeguarding against that. I think you mentioned density, but certainly the number of days a year limits, somebody from buying up a bunch of property and renting them. If you set a short enough time frame, I've certainly had experience commercializing neighborhoods when I ran Airbnb in San Francisco, where I actually bought a building and was commercialized two units that I rented year round, and I probably had, on a yearly basis, 90% occupancy. So there was, I know how to do it, but I'm also thinking that's not what we want to do in Los Gatos. Other comments? Vice Mayor Leonaris.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. So my last comment on the subject would be, we have hotels in town. We want it to be fair to everybody, a level playing field. We wouldn't want to have anybody have a competitive advantage. And I know that if somebody has a single family home and they're renting out rooms for a short period of time, obviously they're not going to compete with a 100-room hotel, but collectively they compete with the hotels. So I think it's important that we look at that when we consider this, because why should those staying in the hotel have to pay 12% more tax and those others not? So fairness issue. And with respect to our local businesses as well, we have to protect them as much as we can.
And in response to that, and that's why I think we're bringing it forward to you, if in fact at the end of the day council says it wants to prohibit it, we would like those teeth in an ordinance to start to do that, to enforce that provision, so there aren't that 100 out there that are doing it with or without taxes and violating our code section. So if we get to the end game, that's where we'd like to make the playing field equal.
All right. If there's no further discussion, I'll call a question. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Looks like it passes unanimously. Thank you, Ms. Zappala. Next up, item number 9, which is review and discussion of disposition strategies for 4 New York Avenue.
Wearing 2 hats this evening. Great. Thank you, Mayor and Town Council. Lauren Andrews, Assistant Town Manager. The item before you is a continuation of discussions we've had about some of the town's surplus properties. This property is 4 New York Avenue, and this council declared it surplus property in 2016. It is an irregularly shaped property that is adjacent to high school property. A lot of the community is familiar with it as it's referred to as the venue. Several appraisals have identified that the property, not only is it irregularly shaped, but it really has kind of two bifurcated parts to it. One part of parcel is about 27,000 square feet and is considered to be usable, developable land. The other parcel is about 47,000 square feet and is considered to be less usable from a development perspective. Tonight, we're bringing this forward to you because at one point we had been in discussions with the high school, and the high school had indicated that perhaps they did not have an interest. I will point out that you do have a desk item today that the high school is re-engaged in the process, and so going forward we can try and identify more about that. But currently in the staff memo, there are 3 proposals who have come forward over the course of the past year as I've been identified as the person managing the surplus properties. The first item that comes before you is from a group that's referred to as the Liverpool Football Club International Academy of America. They are a soccer club that provide all sorts of different soccer training or soccer club programs for the school districts. The gentleman couldn't be here tonight. He may or may not have somebody speak on his behalf. I'm not sure yet. But when I met with him on several occasions, he discussed needing a venue where they could actually engage the youth more off the soccer field, that a lot of the folks that they use in their soccer teams, they develop stronger relationships with, and they think there's a lot more mentoring and education programming and things of that nature that could occur if they had a physical presence. One of the other proposals before you was from an individual, Ann Raleigh, who has met with me on at least 2 occasions to talk about the belief that they think the property would be ideally suited for a type of a wellness center that could also be geared towards the student body that's in the area. But the proposal is kind of tentative on if the council expresses interest or not. So at this stage, it's a definite statement of interest, but not necessarily with a business plan modeled out yet. One of the other proposals before you is KCAT. I believe KCAT had been before you back in 2015 with a similar interest in the property. In meetings with KCAT, they continue to express an interest in the property if there is a way for them to utilize it. They've laid out what they envision, which is, a continuation of the uses that they currently have in existence on the high school property, where not only do they do their programming for the entire community, but they also engage with a lot of student programming at the high school, and they would continue that. And I believe they also envision an expanded use of the property with meeting rooms, and possibly other clubs in the community could use some of the space when it's not being utilized for their purposes. With that, what staff is seeking tonight, similar to the way we kind of handled the Ditto's property, is to get a sense from council if there's any one type of community benefit that they start to resonate with, or if they're looking at this property from a monetization standpoint. Are you looking for the property to generate income, or are you more interested in community benefit? And based on that, staff will then start to go in deeper discussions with some of the proposals that have come forward. With that, we're available for questions.
All right, questions? Okay, we'll start with Councilmember Spector this time.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Anders, I know that you mentioned that depending on what we say here tonight, you would be taking further steps. But with regard to the 3 entities that you reference in your staff report and now the addition of the high school, have any of those entities indicated whether or not they're willing to finance any needed repairs, infrastructure or otherwise? And have they indicated whether or not they would be willing to pay for rent, for example?
So currently in the proposals before you, in the attachments, all we asked of proposers at this stage is kind of a very high-level business model. The soccer club did indicate in their letter to the town that they would be interested in either a long-term lease with an option to purchase or a mortgage if they were capable of getting a mortgage. In the past, I believe KCAT has talked about some type of lease and associated with, a lot of the refurbishing that would need to be done on the inside. And I believe Ann Raleigh has indicated that if it appears as if there might be an interest in her developing that business proposal more, then she will then go and seek ways to either finance it and come back to the town with that proposal.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sack?
Thanks. I see Superintendent Grove here, but the question I had in case he wasn't intending to speak was if you had any information to share from your meetings yesterday that may feed into the continuing interest that's expressed in the letter.
The letter speaks for itself.
Okay. So we're hoping we'll get more information. Do you have a card?
I do.
Okay, thanks.
No, actually, I don't have a card for him, no.
Let me just add that we did share the correspondence with the new superintendent from the last communications with the district, so we wanted to make sure that there was an understanding of that the last round of discussions were really with starting point commentary, and then we had the board's response at that time. So now with the new superintendent, it looks like the interest is renewed, and so we certainly wanted to bring that forward this evening for your consideration along with the other proposals.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Perhaps for the town attorney, ever since I've been on council, which is almost 8 years, we've been discussing this in closed session, so I know a lot of stuff about this venue. What am I allowed to talk about this evening?
Nothing that was said in closed session. And what tonight is really probably to get some direction on which party that you'd like to enter in negotiations with, because then you could go into closed session to discuss that, but you're not allowed to pick who you want in closed session, and that's why this has to be an open session. Your first decision is, and if you don't have enough information to make that decision, then what information do you need to make it? But that's your, really is who do you want to have your exclusive negotiations with, and then we could go into close and discuss those parameters that you'd want to have.
And I would add that it could be party or parties. From a staff perspective, we just want to make sure that if we're going to use, bandwidth to start working on what is, once again, going to be a pretty unique property, that we want to make sure we're moving in a direction right off the bat that kind of aligns with whatever a council kind of vision might be, as opposed to engaging with all parties if one of the parties may or may not align with a council interest. Plus, another reason to queue it up this way is to also just let the community know that we are now talking about another surplus property similar to Ditto's. I'm sure there might be others out in the community that now that they know that this is under discussion, they might even come forward with additional proposals. So as a way of kind of alerting stakeholders that we're now moving through another surplus property. We've been doing it in kind of an iterative fashion, and now this will be the property that we'll be focusing on in the near future.
Thank you.
Councilmember Sack?
So if I could just clarify that, Mr. Andrews, last time with Ditto's, we actually listed out the criteria we were hoping, the criteria we wanted staff to work from to figure out which of the applicants actually met those criteria. Would that be something that you're looking for tonight, so that instead of saying who we want to engage with, it's more this is our goal, and then based on that, you work with the applicants to see which actually meets those goals?
Correct. The construct that we ended up taking with Ditto's actually helped the process, I think, significantly. It winnowed the field down fairly quickly, and then once the field was winnowed down, then we knew who we could really focus with. And the proposers knew where they needed to put their focus. And so I think it really helped the process. And as you mentioned, we're not necessarily looking for somebody to name an entity as opposed to kind of give us parameters, and then the entities can decide if they fit those parameters. What I will do after this meeting is probably then reach out and say, now that we've had the conversation, you've heard the parameters that council has given, you need to start providing me with something more formal in terms of a proposal. And then we can decide if those proposals actually fit the parameters similar to the way we handled the Dittos conversation.
Vice Mayor?
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Are we allowed to ask about what the current valuation is of the property, what we would call the street value?
I'm assuming the appraisals that have been initiated are public information. Since 2012, there's been 3 different appraisals done. They range in value from $700,000 to $2.4 million. There has not been a recent appraisal done.
Thank you.
Okay, if no more questions, I'll open public testimony, and let's start with KCAT and Melissa Torin.
So, hi, Council. I prepared some words, but I think it would be in best interest to hear the parameters of the council before we enter into anything. Does that make sense? Because if we don't fit into your parameters,
I think we don't know what our parameters are yet. We need ideas from probably the people that are proposing. Okay, yeah, we'll ask questions. Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you. I'll just ask you a question then. In the past, when KCAT has been interested in this property, its request of the town is to lease it at $1 per year. Is
Yes.
that still your position?
yes, with
Okay.
renegotiation after 5 or so years.
Okay, $1 per year?
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And Councilmember Spector.
Thank you. Along the same lines, what do you anticipate KCAT would do with regard to revitalizing, keeping in repair, those kinds of issues?
Thank you. So we're envisioning pretty much the same proposal we gave last time. Half would be used for KCAT, the TV station, the studio. The other half we would build for community uses, such as last time, if you recall, we were working with Los Gatos Youth Theater. And so we created classrooms, a dance space. We also created conference rooms, editing for the public, any type of room that a nonprofit would want to hold a meeting at that facility, we were open to do.
And would KCAT assume the responsibility of repairing any repairs that need to be made now and keeping it in repair during this time frame?
Yes.
Okay.
We plan on receiving in-kind donations, which we already had begun to do. We had an architect's drawing renderings, if you remember, and that was pro bono, and we want to continue searching for in-kind donations, partly cash, partly in-kind.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
Councilmember Sack.
The concept that you have of sharing the space to other nonprofits or clubs or other, would you be charging them to use the space, or would this be something that you're offering as a community benefit?
A little bit of both. I think we have to pay to keep our doors open, so maybe a little charge. Hopefully groups will come forward that are profitable and want to rent the space, so
okay.
We'll see.
Is the dance studio still an option, or would you be? One of the proposals is a wellness center. Does that fit into a shared space?
I believe it would. I don't know much about it, so I'd have to.
Okay, another question. If I'm remembering, last time it was somewhere around $2 million to renovate it. And you've had a long time to think about it. Is that still a number you think you can raise in order to do the repairs?
In kind, yes. Yes, I do.
Okay. Further questions? All right. Seeing none, thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Next up, Ann Robinson Raleigh.
Hi, Ann Robinson Rowley, Charter Oaks. I'm here tonight to voice my support in creating a Los Gatos Community Wellness Center at the 4 New York Avenue, formerly known as the Venue. I've already spoke on June 5th regarding this property and my desire to provide Los Gatos youth with a place which focuses on social emotional learning, a vital component to all of our success in life. We envision reaching the adults and seniors in the community by offering health coaching, educational classes, and workshops on various physical and mental health issues, such as mindfulness-based stress reduction and improve your balance classes for seniors. I see this center being intimate and specific to the mental and physical health of our citizens. The center will engage, guide, and support individuals towards health behavior change from within the individual, with the goal being improved mental health, reduced health risk, and better self-management strategies focused on prevention and optimal health. Currently, the trend in health is going downhill. Obesity is on the rise, with 1 in 3 children and 65% of adults considered overweight and obese, leading to a list of chronic health conditions such as diabetes. The Cleveland Clinic considered stress the most common cause of illness in the American society. An article in Johns Hopkins Medical Review reported depression and anxiety in adolescents are on the rise. The odds of adolescents suffering from clinical depression grew by 37% between 2005 and 2014. On a personal note, today is the 26th birthday of my stepson, who passed away in February 2016. He struggled and made some choices and decisions that cost him his life. When I reflect back, I believe a center like this one I'm suggesting would help people who have similar strugglers as his. Therapy, classes, workshops, and programs would cost an affordable fee. I'm hoping the Los Gatos Saratoga Union High School District will contribute and be involved in what is developed for the students. Teens may be able to earn community service hours working at the center or be hired for job skills training. As far as a fundraiser, one idea is an annual community wellness walk from Fisher to Los Gatos High School. At Los Gatos High School, we could have a wellness center open house with interactive activities geared towards mental and physical health, such as how to build healthy family relationships based on respect and empathy, instruction on how to meditate to manage stress, and handouts on how to conduct a weekly family meeting, etc. Then individuals or families can walk downtown to lunch, and during lunch they could try out some of the communication exercises and start implementing the family meeting format, which stresses the importance of spending time to listen and connect with each other in meaningful ways. Then take the kids shopping at businesses downtown. The businesses visited that day by participants could donate a percentage of the lunch check or merchandise purchase to the center. If you're interested in this concept, I'm willing to put forth time and energy to establish a team and work towards a business plan. Thank you.
Okay, questions? Councilmember Sack?
Thank you, Ms. Rowley. A couple of questions, and again, we're just talking out loud since this is the first time we've had a conversation all of us have had a chance to talk with the applicants. Who do you think your target audience would be? How would you be advertising this? Would it be just to the high school? Would it be to the larger community? What are you envisioning?
I'm envisioning community-based, so I'm envisioning all the residents of Los Gatos. I want a strong focus, obviously, on social emotional learning and the high school in general. And I think currently, from what I understand from some people I've spoke with, that the district is already implementing a wellness team, and there's ideas at Saratoga for, having some wellness programs and things like that, but nothing's, from what I understand, is concrete or hasn't been fully developed yet. It's all ideas. So I'm kind of hoping that will come towards me and we can work together and develop some kind of center that combines the school district ideas and my ideas.
Go ahead.
The second question I have, and the reason why I was asking for that, is given its location, parking is always an issue. Mm-hmm. And so how do you envision your hours of operation, working with the school hours, and then ultimately parking for those that plan to visit your wellness center?
So that's a good question, and something I've given some thought to. Of course, during the school hours, the parking's taken by students, and it's difficult. if during the school hours, that's where we can implement some programs for the students. That would be what I would envision. I thought maybe, people can walk if it's something that they could park in town and walk to classes. I mean, it is a health center. I mean, walking is something people could do as part of their health. So the church also has some senior programs, and I thought the church isn't far from the high school. Maybe people could walk from the church over if there was a program there that could also lead into a program at the wellness center. So, these are ideas. Obviously, after school, the parking lot's open. So, of course, there could be some adult programs in the evening. Weekends, the parking lot's open. There could be programs then. So, some things would have to be worked out in that regard.
Thank you. And my last question, you've heard the idea of sharing space. With your idea, do you need the entire space, or is it possible to move into a partnership so that you're just using part of the venue?
It's negotiable. I mean, I haven't really envisioned the space as far as what's going to go where. I just know it's a valuable space. It's a space that I think is underutilized, and I see a need for wellness, especially with the kids these days. From my daughter's a counselor at Saratoga High School with Cassie, and I hear how kids are in need, and I'm a physical therapist, 30 plus years. I see the need for health coaching, for helping people with health behavior change. So that's kind of why I'm here.
Vice Mayor.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Ms. Rowley, 2 questions. What days of the week and the hours would you wish to utilize the space?
I was thinking from, as soon as school opens in the morning, or even maybe before school, if kids wanted to show up early, to it could be 8 o'clock at night, 9 o'clock at night with adult classes, adult people that want therapy at night after work. So I'm looking at, from early in the morning till 8 or 9 at night, and then on weekends also. I'm thinking of it as as something that's open. Could it be open 7 days a week?
And another question. There's interest in the venue building this evening. Have you considered any other properties that the town owns? There's the former Tate Museum. There's the Forbes Mill property, which is also very close to the venue, which might be convenient for the use that you're describing.
To be honest, no. I mean, my heart's kind of set on the venue just because it's so adjacent to the high school, and I really wanted this to be a strong focus towards teens and having it accessible to teens to just be right there, right on their property. So to be honest, I haven't looked at those properties or even considered them.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Jensen.
Thank you. I want to go away from your vision, which sounds nice, to economics.
Mm-hmm.
How would you, if it's correct that the property requires $2 million in infrastructure improvements, how would you go about doing that, and what would you be willing to offer versus for a lease and or purchase for that property for the town?
So I don't expect it to be free. I expect, as far as the initial cost of setting up the venue or the health wellness center, I would hope to get some help with donations from the community is what I would be looking for. And of course, I'm not that far into the business plan to know where that money would actually come from, but I would hope to have some fundraisers, to have some donations that come from citizens, a GoFundMe page. So I haven't gotten that far but as a continuation after the renovation, therapy is going to cost money. Classes, programs there will be a fee for those things. So I'm hoping that income from the programs and therapy will pay for a monthly rent fee.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think all my questions were covered by others, so thank you very much, Ms. Rowley. Next up is Tony Palma.
Mr. Groves here, our new superintendent. I'll let him speak on my behalf. He has a card, if that's okay.
Sure.
Thank you. I had asked Tony to come because we were in our own board meeting, so I wasn't sure I was going to be able to make it before you hit the agenda item, so we're tag teaming out. So thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Mike Grove. I'm the new superintendent in the Los Gatos Saratoga Union High School District. The intent of my comments tonight are to reinforce the fact that the school district does continue to have interest in the venue property. I know that there was some communication sent to the council indicating that we did not have any further interest, and I think that was based upon the end of previous conversations between the town and the school district. But we do continue to have interest in that property. As you know, the property is essentially landlocked within Los Gatos High School, and it is sort of natural and makes sense that the district and the school would offer programming and use it for educational purposes. We are aware of the facility upgrades that would be required there and would be committed to doing the renovations if were we to enter into an agreement either to purchase or to lease the property over the long term. I've been on the job all of 4.5 weeks, and I've already had one internal meeting with staff to discuss what a plan might be for that property. Because honestly, when I was driving around the high school for the first time, I looked at that and went, "What is that?" And it was kind of boarded up over there in the corner, and it didn't look like it was being used. So had a lot of conversations around kind of what might we do with that were we to have access to it. Nothing concrete, but had some conversations. Obviously, as the previous speaker mentioned, student wellness is a big issue for us right now, the anxiety and stress that our teens are facing, and particularly in a community like ours, that what I refer to as the college arms race. It's a whole different world than when all of us were applying to college and looking at that. So that is an area where we are very actively working, and that's been one of the topics of conversation of potentially having that be a wellness center for our students, both at Los Gatos and potentially Saratoga. I also want to express some concern regarding the concept of other groups either taking ownership or long-term lease of that property due to concerns about the security of the campus, traffic, parking, all of those sorts of things. And I don't want you or anyone else in the room to take that as a concern directly related to any of the groups who have proposed. It's more conceptual for us, as right now the property is not used for anything. It is shuttered up and not used. So any group who takes rights to that property is going to rightly and reasonably expect to increase activity there. And that would mean that we have people coming there from the broader public. We have cars coming there, and a high school does not stop operating at 2:15 when the last bell rings. There are an enormous number of extracurricular activities. We have students and staff there late into every evening, and so we have concerns about issues of security, not being able to control who is coming on campus when we have students and staff present. Parking and traffic are the kind of concerns that it raises for us. And again, it's not about any particular group. It's about the concept of having a group in a place over which we would ultimately have no control. And so I just kind of wanted to reiterate to the town and the council that we are very interested in continuing conversations about how our district may gain rights to that property either through ownership or a long-term lease. And no concrete proposal, but would be very interested in having further conversations with the town about that.
Okay, questions? Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Well, first of all, welcome to Los Gatos.
Thank you. I appreciate
all of 4 weeks, right?
Uh-huh. It's very green here. I'm used to brown, so. San Diego. So.
Okay. You got some blue there, too. In any event, if we make some assumptions, if we assume that the building that you see needs to be cleaned, needs to be repaired, might need to be rebuilt, and if we assume that it could be purchased, it could be leased, that there are other entities that are interested in it, as you've heard.
Mm-hmm.
Within those parameters and within the fact that you are sort of new, how much time would you need to be able to sit down and have some discussions with our town representatives?
In terms of how much time would I need to come up with a concrete sort of proposal?
No, I think in my mind, it would be more, it would be earlier than that. Like to sit down and say, well, these are my thoughts, and my thoughts are I might want to buy it, or my thoughts are I might want to lease it, and I'm going to need X more time. To have some sincere, substantive, but preliminary discussions.
I think we are ready to proceed with those quickly. I would say in a matter of the next week or two beginning those conversations. I've had some initial communication with my board members about this, letting them know that this topic was back on your agenda and that we were expressing renewed interest in the property. I can't obviously commit for what their level of commitment is going to be in terms of financial commitment, in terms of a purchase at market value or something like that. That would be a discussion we need to have as a board, but I think we need to have some initial conversation with the town around what is it that the town is looking for, the parameters that you have mentioned, the criteria, and then we can have some internal conversations around what is it that we're ready to sort of commit to in terms of moving ahead with this project.
Great. Thank you very much.
Councilmember Sack.
Thank you, Superintendent Grove. So one of, as you can hear, one of the applicants was KCAT, and they're also on your campus.
Correct.
So what if it were something as simple as one entity moves to one location and you take possession of the other? Is like one building more valuable to your long-term plans than the other?
I would say that the space that KCAT is currently in is an older classroom building, and we have I don't think would probably be large enough to do a full student wellness center that we have kind of had some initial conversations about. We also have interest in the open land that isn't developable in terms of building something on it for things like the school garden, our agroecology classes, our environmental science classes, being able to use it as lab space and not needing to build something on it, but being able to use it as a lab space.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that enters that. So if I'm to understand this correctly, the venue space is more valuable at this time to your long-term.
I would say yes.
If you could just walk me through, what is the high school policy of having non-students there during school hours? Is it even allowed?
No.
Okay.
Any visitor, and it's challenging at a school like Los Gatos High School that has no perimeter fencing, and it has multiple entry and exit points, so it's a difficult campus to control. And in this day and age, unfortunately, schools have to be highly concerned about who's coming on to campus. So the policy is any visitor to campus has to check in at the front office, be checked at that point, have a visitor badge before they can enter campus.
Okay, so that's very valuable information. Third question I have for you is, there was a lot of discussion about wellness, student wellness, and Cassie, I know, is a organization that is doing well.
Yes.
Is there an actual physical location that Cassie sits in at the high school, or is it a team of
So
Cassie
Cassie is
specialists?
a provider that comes and provides services, mental health support, counseling services to students on our campuses. So they are not our direct employees. We contract with that agency to provide services to our student. They are housed in our, in our counseling offices. The Cassie counselors have an office just like our guidance counselors do, or our school psychologists, things like that. So they don't have a separate kind of building in which they live. They operate alongside our staff.
Okay. And then the last question I have for you, if it's okay, Mr. Mayor, is your long-term plans for your wellness center. I'm assuming, but if you could just confirm, it's strictly for your students?
That would be its primary purpose, obviously. It would be something where, I could see us developing some community partnerships with that, but our primary interest would be to serve our students.
Okay. Thank you.
Vice Mayor Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. Mr. Grove, the previous speaker talked also about a wellness center and their vision for a wellness center, which might deviate from yours slightly, I don't know. But I do like the concept of college counseling and those kinds of things. Would you be willing to consider teaming up with the previous speaker to understand more about their vision?
I would absolutely be. I was sitting there in the audience saying, need to sit down and we need to sit down and have a conversation with her about her vision for what that might look like. As I mentioned, one of the concerns would be, so if it is a open community and we're talking about people coming in and receiving therapy services and things like that, honestly, in the midst of our campus without some level of security of who's coming onto campus, I would have significant concerns about that. And I think that's a reasonable concern for us to have. So I think we're open to conversations, but we're going to have, I would think, to make sure that it would fall within what makes sense to having a center in the middle of a high school campus.
One more non-related question. Is there any property that the district owns that they may consider trading to the town of Los Gatos for this property?
So we have one property that we, with a facility that we rent out, has warehouses on it that we rent out to two businesses right now. I have no idea the valuation of that. My guess is that it may be more than the value of the venue property, but I don't know that for sure.
Go ahead.
So I would need to have a lot more information before I'd be willing to comment on that.
Do you know how much the rent is that you receive?
I don't.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, one last question. You indicated your preference to a wellness center there and leaving KCAT where it is. And you also indicated concern of outside groups. But if we let KCAT move to the venue as was the plan before, it's not your optimal, but it sounds like it's not that bad either. Can you comment on that?
I would say it would depend on, for us, and again, I'm speaking purely from looking at it from the perspective of the school. What I heard was KCAT would operate there, over which we would have very little concern. They're operating in the middle of our campus now, but I also heard then wanting to rent out that space for a variety of other events, which that would directly impact the school, which would be, it's not the KCAT operation, it's if KCAT were to then expand their business model to try and rent the facility out, to try and generate revenue for themselves, that would be of concern for us in terms of the impact on our school.
Okay, thank you. All right, seeing no more questions, thank you.
Thank you.
And I assume Mr. Palma doesn't need to speak.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I have no more cards. Would anybody else wish to speak? All right, seeing nobody coming forward, I'll close public testimony, come back to council. Do you need motions or just comments?
Let's see how the conversation goes.
Okay, Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I was going to start with conversation anyway, so thank you. Thoughts? No conclusions yet. First of all, I thought all of the individuals who presented on behalf of their business plans or their organizations are all good, positive, good potential uses for the venue. Having said that, my preference or my thought at this point is I would like to give the high school the opportunity to talk with the town before we take any other steps. I understand that the high school could just be a high school use, or it could include one or two of the others that have spoken. So my thought would be to give the high school and town the opportunity to talk before we go any further.
Councilmember Jensen.
If staff is looking for a motion, and if that was converted to a motion, I would second it.
All right, then my motion is that we give the town and the high school the opportunity to discuss the sale, rental of this property before we take any further steps.
And I will second that motion, the reason being that the property is smack dab in the middle of the high school, and it makes absolute sense for it to be used for a high school use. We've unfortunately had problems negotiating how that would work. Mr. Grove, welcome. Thank you for being here. I think you're the first superintendent to come and talk to us from the high school, so that's already a good sign. So if it's a wellness center, that's great. If it's something else, I share the concern with, although I live by the high school, and I would hate to see it fenced off because I come down and use the track, so please don't do that.
Make her get a pass.
I can see that if you were having, in our climate now, unfortunately, it would not make sense to allow open therapy on a high school campus. But it makes sense for that property to be used as a high school property. It was originally, as the venue, it was for high school students, so it's a natural. So I hope that you keep your ears and eyes open for people that can help you out, and I look forward to hopefully you continue your discussions with the town.
Vice Mayor Leonardis.
Thank you. A question for the maker of the motion. So when you say the high school and the town enter into negotiations, are you referring to town staff? Are you referring to town council in closed session?
Well, that's probably, should I go ahead and answer?
Well, it's really up to you. You know, our policy is not to ask questions directly, but if you would like to speak, please feel free.
Thank you. I like that policy. I'm going to actually defer in a second to the town attorney, but my thought was that the high school would be talking with our staff. Depending on what happens there, then I would assume it would go to us in closed session. But I will now ask the town attorney.
That's absolutely correct.
As a seconder, that was my assumption.
Okay, Councilmember Sack.
I'll support the motion, and I want to echo the welcomes. It's nice to see the whole team here. What I'm looking for, I know that as we enter into negotiations, one of the things I was going to ask was, given the location, that we really focus on the teens and youth and just their overall wellness. And if there is an opportunity to open it up at appropriate times for the entire community, I think engaging in a conversation with some of the ideas would be valuable before coming to us. Just because what I'd love is this idea of a community supporting the teens that are actually on that campus. I think the high school swimming pool is a perfect example where we all find value in coming together to make that happen. And so if we could have another capital improvement there, I think that would be something that would be remarkable.
Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is another question of staff, just so I have it clear in my mind. what streets are around or into the high school property are town streets, i.e. New York, or is it not? So what is the public access to the venue, if indeed there is such a public access?
New York Avenue continues to be a town street. It is a thoroughfare, even though it goes through the campus. It does dead end basically at the 4 New York Avenue property. The 4 New York property itself only has about 2 to 3 parking spaces in front of it. That's not to say that you couldn't re-engineer the property to try and come up with more parking, but otherwise, the only other parking that would not be on high school property would be along New York Avenue.
Thank you.
Vice Mayor Leonardis.
A question leads to another question. Does the town still own Chicago Avenue and Brooklyn Avenue and High School Court?
I'm going to defer that question to Matt Morley, but I believe the answer is yes.
So the town does not own Chicago Avenue. That belongs to the high school. We own most of High School Court up into about the bulb part of the cul-de-sac, a little bit before that, and then the other streets are town streets.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So just one point of clarification again on the motion. So no disposition of the property would be made without council approval. Okay.
Okay, I'll make a couple comments. I'm in support of the motion. I definitely think it's most appropriate for the high school to use this spot, and I'd like to give them an opportunity to negotiate. Although I'm sensitive to, we went down this road before, and it was kind of before I was on council, so I'm not completely sure whether council was unrealistic or the high school was unrealistic, and we were never able to negotiate anything. I would remind the high school that there are other options we can do with it, so that please negotiate fairly in it, and I expect that we'll negotiate fairly. I guess my point is, just because it's stuck in the middle of the high school, don't think that we have to do what the high school wants to do. I guess that's my point, because we definitely didn't get to agreement last time. Councilmember Spector.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And the thought that I wanted to communicate to the high school, to the community, is that way back when we first started discussing this property, it was always my hope, and I believe our hope, that we would be able to have serious negotiations with the high school, and that never came to pass. And so I'm looking forward to new faces, new thoughts, and new opportunities.
I think that kind of is what I'm trying to say. Vice Mayor Leonardis.
Thank you, Mayor Rennie. And I just want to emphasize the point. The venue was started for the youth of the community. It was given to the town. The building was built by volunteers. And those are all great things. But the town of Los Gatos owns it. And as a council, I guess we can give it away for youth causes to somebody else. But we also have financial responsibilities. We have obligations and things. And the best use could be for the high school or KCAT or another entity. But we also have to look at what's the best use of the public's wealth as well. In other words, we have to take those decisions into consideration. Even though it was given to us, we might not have the right just to give it away. So when we have to think about those things.
Okay, if no more comments, I'll call the question. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Seeing none, passes unanimously. And that's our last agenda item. Do staff need anything more from us? Nope.
Oh, thank you.
All right, then with that, we're adjourned.